The first scream wasn't hers. It was the snow. Like it had been holding its breath too long and finally cracked from the weight of something terrible. 1 second 16-year-old Lila Verdon was laughing, throwing snow at her classmates on a frozen hilltop on Ganymede, and the next she was staring into the hollow visor of something tall, armored, and not remotely human. The alien mercenary didn't say a word. It just raised its three-fingered hand and Lila disappeared in a flash of violet light, leaving only a charred indentation in the ice and a pair of mittens still falling through the air. 14 minutes later, Cain Verdon, her father, got the news in the middle of fixing a jammed waste recycler on his ship. The call came in from the school's security AI, politely informing him that his daughter had likely been abducted and the authorities were already investigating. Cain didn't blink. He didn't ask questions. He walked to a locked cabinet at the back of the storage bay, entered a code he swore he'd forgotten, and opened it. Inside was a black helmet with old blood on the visor and a small red switch on the side labeled safety. He stared at it for a long second. Then flicked the switch. Somewhere, very far away, a mercenary who had once fought in the Shadow Wars dropped his drink and said, "Oh no. Not him. Not again." Cain had once been a war machine in a man's skin. The government had built him up, trained him, unleashed him. Then, when the war ended, they'd put a chip in his neck and told him to calm down. The chip dulled his rage, leveled his emotions, made him a father instead of a monster. But that chip didn't stand a chance against the scream of snow. Or a daughter's sudden silence. On a worn-out workbench, Cain dusted off the EX-73 reclaimer suit. It was old tech, but it had a soul. Or maybe just a bad attitude. He pulled it apart, cleaned it, and began reinstalling systems by memory alone. There was no music playing. No dramatic lighting. Just the sound of tools and the kind of breathing a man does when he knows he's about to do something irreversible. The planet-wide alert had already reached the outer systems. The abductors identified themselves through a shaky, encrypted transmission. "The Grivik Syndicate has claimed its prize," the voice buzzed, alien and distorted. "She will not be returned. Interference will result in absolute consequences." Cain watched the message replayed across screens in the nearby outpost bar, where no one dared look at him. A bartender tried to say something comforting. Cain raised one hand and the man froze. "If I come back through here," Cain said without turning around, "don't let me. Kill me. Or I'll keep going." The bartender nodded once, then disappeared below the counter. Meanwhile, inside the Grivik transport ship, Lila woke up strapped to a metal slab. Her hands were bound in energy cuffs and a needle was digging into her neck. "This is extremely unsanitary," she said, her voice surprisingly calm for someone being prodded by what looked like a praying mantis in power armor. The mantis didn't respond. Another alien stepped into view, this one covered in scars and a coat made of flayed synthetic skin. "You are lucky," it rasped. "You are special." Lila tilted her head. "Is that your opening line? I give it a 4. The alien blinked at her, confused. It wasn't used to hostages talking back. "You mock death?" "No," she said. "I mock you. Death at least has a sense of drama." On Cain's end, time stopped meaning anything. He didn't eat. Didn't sleep. He plugged directly into Betsy, his ancient, rusted dropship. Betsy coughed to life like an old woman waking from a nap she didn't consent to. Her onboard AI groaned. "Oh great. You're back. And you're suicidal again. Fantastic." Cain didn't respond. The AI tried again. "Cain. Look. We've been through this. I'm a retired garbage hauler. You're a deactivated war asset. Let's not play dress up and die in space. Plot course to Ganymede orbit," Cain said, eyes locked on a spinning holomap. "Track their trajectory." The AI sighed. "Fine. But if you die, I'm deleting all your sad guitar recordings." Elsewhere, in the icy black of orbit, the Grivik ship punched through asteroid fields with untraceable warp bursts. They weren't worried. No one would follow them. Not unless they wanted to die. Not unless they were insane. Unfortunately for them, Cain Verdon had left sanity somewhere in a trench 10 years ago. He arrived at the outpost where his old war contact Kha'Zix lived, a hacker-turned-hermit with 3 mechanical legs and a pet spider that answered to Susan. The door opened to reveal Kha'Zix in the middle of feeding Susan what looked like canned bacon. Well, he said, squinting. Cain, you look like hell met a shotgun. I need a trace on the Grivik ship. Sure. Let me just sell my soul and connect to an illegal galactic node running on quantum plasma and spite. Anything else? Cain said nothing. Kha'Zix sighed. Of course. Because helping you never ends in orbital explosions. Lila, meanwhile, used her braces, actual dental braces, to create a low-level frequency by grinding them against the metal surface of her cell wall. The noise interfered with the surveillance drones just long enough for her to slip a small metal pin from her boot, hidden there just in case of abduction by insected mercenaries. She'd packed it next to her emergency snack bar. Priorities. Cain and Kha'Zix hacked the Grivik trail to reveal their destination, a storm-locked fortress known as Vortex Cradle, sitting in the eye of an unending blizzard on a dead moon. No one gets in, Kha'Zix warned. And nothing gets out. Cain looked at the storm's data. I'm not nothing. Back in her cell, Lila peered through the bars at a flickering image in the opposite chamber. Her eyes widened. Dad? It wasn't him. It was something that looked like him. Same face. Same scars. But eyes dead as stone. A clone. The clone turned and smiled. He'll come. He always does. On board Betsy, Cain finished powering up the EX-73. The suit hissed and groaned as it latched onto his body, fitting like old skin. He stood at the edge of the loading ramp, staring out into the swirling black before him. He whispered to himself, You took my daughter. I'm taking your galaxy. Then the engines flared. The snow screamed again. And the hunt began. The sky above Arc 7 flickered with magnetic storms, the kind that made skin itch and NAV systems twitch like they were possessed. Cain Verdon stood at the edge of a cliff, visor darkened, suit humming like an angry animal ready to bite. Below him stretched a jagged wasteland of frost and rock, pitted with the remains of mining colonies and long-dead satellites. Somewhere out there, beyond the white void, his daughter was still breathing. Or not. The thought was a dull ache behind his eyes, the kind that didn't go away with time, just got sharper until it cut through everything else. He liked it that way. It kept him moving. Inside Betsy, the old ship's AI was singing to itself, something disturbingly close to opera but with the pitch of a cat in a blender. Cain ignored it as he pulled up the tracking data from Kha'Zix. The hacker had managed to lock on to the Grivik ship's energy signature before it vanished into the storm over Vortex Cradle. Getting there was suicide. Which was convenient, because Cain had officially stopped caring about survival right around the time someone took Lila. In a grimy control room buried in a dead cargo freighter, Kha'Zix was busy swearing at his own fingers while welding a neural uplink into a drone. The spider, Susan, was wearing a tiny welding visor and offering moral support in the form of non-judgmental clicking. Kha'Zix muttered about Cain being insane, about him owing back rent for 10 years, and about why someone always had to kidnap a teenager to start interplanetary drama. Still, even as he grumbled, his fingers moved fast, locking in the coordinates, bouncing signals off hidden satellites like a symphony of quiet rebellion. He wouldn't admit it, but a small part of him missed the chaos. Inside the Grivik vessel, Lila was in motion. Not physically. They had her locked down tight. But her mind was sprinting laps. The cell was clean, sterile, humming with alien tech. Her cuffs had adaptive AI, which meant they learned from her escape attempts. She'd already triggered 2 shock pulses, 1 knockout gas flood, and a small foam explosion that glued her to the wall for 3 hours. She had a welt on her temple and no regrets. Her next plan was stupid, which made it perfect. The Grivik ship was approaching the edge of Ganymede's outer orbit, where Vortex Cradle lay buried in the eye of a permanent storm that fried anything without a very specific clearance code. The only reason the Syndicate could access it was because they owned the fortress. Or more accurately, they had bought it from the last people who had tried to conquer death and instead achieved screaming madness. Lila didn't know all the details. What she knew was this: they weren't keeping her alive out of kindness. She was part of something. A puzzle she hadn't agreed to solve. Back on the ground, Cain was busy slaughtering a bounty hunter team that had made the mistake of trying to collect on his old war price. There were 6 of them, all armored, all cocky, all dead within 90 seconds. He didn't use fancy techniques. He just moved with that terrifying efficiency that came from knowing exactly how fragile a body really was. One he punched in the throat. Another got his arm broken and used as a club against the third. By the time the fourth tried to escape, Cain casually rolled a thermal grenade under the snow, detonating it mid-sentence. When the last one begged, Cain stared at him, unreadable, then walked away without a word. The snow covered the body like it was tired of looking at it. Kha'Zix's voice buzzed into Cain's helmet. The connection was weak, but functional. Kha'Zix had news. Bad, of course. He'd intercepted a signal from inside the Grivik Syndicate. Someone high up, maybe their strategist, had let something slip. They weren't just moving Lila. They were preparing for activation. Cain didn't need clarification. He knew what that meant. Something buried deep inside Lila was starting to wake up. And the people who put it there didn't care if she survived the process. They just needed the weapon functional. Cain didn't remember much from the Zero Voice project. Only flashes. Screams. Needles. The sharp smell of burning neurons. He remembered signing something. He remembered a desperate voice saying we need a failsafe. He remembered walking out and promising his infant daughter she would never be touched by that life. Apparently he'd lied. Or they had. Maybe both. Betsy's systems buzzed with red warnings as they approached the storm barrier around Vortex Cradle. The wind screamed louder than any engine. Visibility dropped to 0. Cain took manual control, guiding the ship by feel and memory, trusting old instincts. The AI begged him to reconsider. He didn't. Instead, he muttered something under his breath, an old soldier's prayer or maybe a curse, then pushed the throttle forward. Inside the storm, electromagnetic interference fried drones, bent light, and whispered lies to weak minds. Cain's didn't flinch. The suit compensated, stabilizing pressure, grounding his neurons to prevent hallucinations. Betsy took a hit from a rogue lightning arc and groaned like a dying whale, but she held together. Just long enough to breach the wall of snow and break into the eye of the storm. Vortex Cradle stood like a cathedral to cruelty, all jagged towers and black ice, lit by unnatural blue veins that pulsed like a heartbeat. The air shimmered with heat in the cold, like the laws of physics were struggling to apply. Cain landed Betsy with a crunch of snow and static, then disembarked without ceremony. His boots hit the ground and the fortress noticed. Doors shifted. Cameras blinked. And somewhere deep inside, Irash stirred. Lila, in her cell, felt it too. A low vibration in her bones. A presence. She didn't know her father was near. But something in her gut whispered that the storm had just changed direction. She looked up from the makeshift tools she'd been crafting out of chair parts and broken plating, and for the first time since her abduction, she smiled. Cain moved through the outer defenses like a ghost. Automated turrets locked on too slow. Drones fell from the sky before they could squeal. The first mercenary guard he encountered barely had time to scream before his body hit the wall, and his weapon was turned against his own squad. Cain didn't talk. He didn't need to. The building itself seemed to remember him, groaning under the weight of something older than vengeance. The old reclaimer had returned. He reached the gate and planted a spiked charge. It beeped twice, then exploded in a silent flash that evaporated the steel barrier. Cain stepped through into the heart of the storm, his mind razor-focused, his pulse calm. Somewhere in this nightmare of ice and violence, his daughter waited. And she was not alone. There was a clone. A past echo. A version of him that didn't escape the war. That was fine. Cain had stopped running. Now, it was the past's turn to fear him. The walls of Vortex Cradle pulsed with cold light, a heartbeat of something ancient and wrong. Cain moved through its interior with methodical precision, eyes scanning every corridor, every shifting shadow. The reclaimer suit responded like an extension of his thoughts, reading the environment, tracking movement, adjusting to gravity shifts caused by the fortress's warped gravitational core. This place was alive in ways metal should not be. The deeper he went, the more the air pressed inward, thick and unnatural, as if the structure itself was watching him, remembering him. Lila crouched in the corner of her cell, watching the clone through the faint shimmer of the energy field between them. He looked like her father, but younger, sharper, without the wear of time or regret. His face was calm, too calm. It was the calm of someone who had no soul left to lose. When he smiled, it wasn't a smile at all. It was the memory of one. She hated him immediately, and yet some part of her, some stupid biological whisper, wanted to believe he was real. But then he spoke and shattered the illusion. He said her name like it was a password, something ancient and sacred. She didn't respond. He leaned forward, resting his hands against the glass, the same way her father had when he used to check on her in the med bay when she got sick as a kid. But this time there was no comfort in the gesture. There was only calculation. They made me to be him, he said softly. They took his neural map and ripped out the parts they didn't like. Left only the soldier. No fear. No hesitation. No love. Lila stared at him, heart pounding. She whispered one word. Why? Because he made me, the clone said. He asked them to. Before he forgot. Before they erased it all. Cain breached the inner sanctum like a storm, his fists tearing open bulkheads, his eyes dead to everything except forward motion. Turrets tried to track him, but the suit's countermeasures fried their optics before they could blink. The Grivik Mercs, once feared across half the system, now backed away when they saw the ghost in black armor. Cain wasn't subtle. He wanted them to see him coming. He wanted them to feel the weight of their mistake before he ended them. Every step he took echoed through the walls, through the compound, through time itself. He entered a long corridor lined with holoscreens playing archival war footage. On each screen, he was there. A younger version of him, eyes on fire, carving through enemy forces like a god of death. It was meant to intimidate him, remind him what he had been. Instead, it made him smile for the first time since the abduction. If they thought that man was dangerous, they hadn't met the one who had something left to lose. A figure stepped out from the far end of the corridor. Female. Tall. Wrapped in white robes made of synthetic threads that shimmered like liquid snow. Her eyes were a deep crimson, glowing softly, and her expression was unreadable. Cain raised a hand, ready to blast her to atoms. But she spoke first. You don't remember me, she said. Cain paused, every instinct screaming to move, kill, clear the threat. But something in her voice was familiar. Dr. Archoy, she said. We built Project Zero Voice together. The words hit Cain like a truck. He lowered his hand, just slightly. Enough to listen. You volunteered, she said. You weren't forced. You believed in it. You just couldn't live with it after what it cost. What did it cost? He asked, voice low and cold. Your soul, she replied. And hers. She led him down another corridor, deeper into the cradle's heart, while the walls around them seemed to shudder with awareness. She explained what Project Zero Voice had been. A thought-based weapon. A mental cascade engineered from DNA that could broadcast a single psychic command across planetary networks. One word. One thought. And anything listening would cease to exist. Not just die. Be unmade. Lila was the vessel. The last surviving prototype. Cain had given her the seed before she was born. Then he had used experimental neural suppression to erase his own memory of doing so. It was the only way to live with himself. The only way to hold her and not see the weapon beneath her skin. Lila, still in her cell, could feel something crawling under her thoughts. A low static, not sound but pressure, blooming behind her eyes. The scientists outside her cell were panicking, yelling into comms, arguing about containment. One of them reached for a trigger device on his belt, but his hand disintegrated mid-reach, vanishing into ash. The others backed away, terrified. Lila didn't understand what was happening. She only knew she was starting to hear voices. Not from others. From herself. Future versions. Possibilities. She heard herself scream. She heard herself whisper a word that made reality bend. Cain reached the observation deck just as alarms began to blare. Red lights flooded the halls. Arash had been watching from above, a throne room built into the spire's crown. He was not surprised. He had planned for this. The activation had begun. The weapon was waking up, and there was no turning back. Cain smashed through the observation room, sending glass and bone flying. The scientist inside tried to draw a plasma blade. Cain disarmed him with one movement, took the blade, and impaled him to the wall. No questions. No mercy. He moved to the console and saw her. Lila. Floating. Eyes rolled back. The air around her vibrating with silent frequency. Cain didn't speak. He didn't cry. He just touched the screen, and something inside him cracked. Not the soldier. The father. The clone appeared behind him, silent as shadow. The real confrontation had arrived. Cain turned, eyes narrowing. They circled each other, mirror images broken by time and choices. The clone struck first, fast and brutal. Cain parried, countered, dodged a strike that would have shattered a mountain. They moved like wolves, tearing through the room, each blow a reminder of who they were, who they could have been. It wasn't a fight between good and evil. It was a fight between past and present. You gave her this curse, the clone snarled. I gave her a chance, Cain snapped back. She'll never be free, the clone shouted. Then I'll burn down the galaxy to make her, Cain said. They clashed again, and this time Cain won. Barely. He didn't kill the clone. He left him broken, unconscious. Because even now, he couldn't kill what was once part of him. Cain rushed to the containment chamber, overriding the locks with Dr. Archoy screaming in his ear that it was too late. But Cain didn't believe in too late. He believed in Lila. He believed in her strength. He would find a way to pull her back. He always had. Even when it meant dragging her out of the fire with his own burned hands. The door opened. The storm inside the room was like stepping into the mind of a dying god. Lila hovered above the floor, whispering something over and over. Cain stepped forward. She stopped. And she said one word. Dad. And the storm shattered. The storm didn't end when Lila spoke. It broke in a different way, curling inward like a creature exhaling after being caged too long. The psychic hum dropped in pitch, the energy in the room settled just enough for Cain to take a step forward without feeling like his skin was going to peel off his bones. Lila floated a few inches off the floor, hair drifting around her like she was underwater. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, there was nothing but recognition. Not weapon to creator. Not project to architect. Just daughter to father. That moment lasted 3 seconds before the room screamed again. Reality shimmered like heat over sand, and for a heartbeat Cain wasn't in the chamber anymore. He was in a memory, or something shaped like one. The walls of the fortress vanished, replaced by a field of white flowers under a red sky. In front of him stood a younger version of himself, holding a baby wrapped in a gray blanket. The baby cooed, then turned to ash in the wind. Cain blinked, clenching his fists, and the illusion cracked. The suit's neural stabilizers screamed warnings in his ear as the room tried to rewrite itself again. He forced his way back, breath ragged, and reached for Lila, grabbing her hand just as her body began to tremble. She fell into his arms like a collapsing tower, heavy and shaking and too quiet. The suit absorbed the brunt of the residual energy, sparing Cain's nervous system from overload, but he still felt the echo of it crawl down his spine. He lowered her gently to the ground, scanning for any damage. Her vitals were stable but fluctuating, like two rhythms fighting for control inside her chest. One was her heartbeat. The other was something older. Something built. The door behind them hissed open and Dr. Archoy stepped inside, flanked by a pair of synthetic guards. Cain stood instantly, placing himself between them and Lila, teeth bared. Archoi raised her hands. She needs to be stabilized, Archoi said, voice calm, almost gentle. If she destabilizes again, this entire section of the facility could unravel. Cain didn't move. You didn't just build her, Archoi said. You're connected to her, Cain. Biologically. Neurologically. The code you implanted reacts to you. Cain stared at her, processing the words like they were knives being slowly driven into his chest. So fix it, he said. Not here, Archoi replied. The cradle is collapsing. Too much strain. We need to get her out. The synthetic guards stepped forward, and Cain tensed. Archoi stopped them with a word. She nodded toward a corridor behind her, one lined with blinking lights and descending ramps. The core lab, she said. That's where it all began. That's where we finish it. Cain scooped Lila up into his arms. She stirred faintly, muttering in a voice that wasn't quite her own. Words he didn't understand. Words that made the lights above them flicker with each syllable. As they moved deeper into the cradle, Cain noticed how the walls had changed. The clean, cold lines of engineered metal were warping into something more organic. The lights were pulsing with a rhythm that felt alive. The fortress was reacting to Lila, adapting, or maybe submitting. They reached the core lab just as a shockwave rippled through the foundation. Alarms screamed. Automated defenses went haywire and began shooting at nothing. Cain laid Lila on a diagnostic bed, and Archoi moved quickly, inserting neuroregulators and syncing the system to her vitals. This was your design, she said. You'll need to guide it. You'll have to enter the memory core and interface directly. Cain hesitated. The memory core was a digital mindscape, a simulation of layered neural data. Once inside, time moved differently. He could be in there for hours while seconds passed outside. If he got stuck, there was no pulling him out. But he didn't hesitate long. Do it, he said. Archoi connected a tether to the back of his neck. The moment it engaged, Cain's body stiffened, then slumped, while his consciousness dropped into the void. He woke up in a garden. But it wasn't real. The plants were too symmetrical. The sky was still. The wind looped every 30 seconds. Lila stood in the center, her younger self, maybe 6 years old, holding a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing. She looked up at him and frowned. You lied, she said. Cain stepped toward her. I didn't want to, he said. But you did, she replied. The world shifted, became the war. Bombs fell from the sky, and Cain stood among the rubble, surrounded by dying soldiers, voices screaming in his ears. Lila walked past the bodies without looking down. You made me so they'd stop, she said. Yes, Cain replied. You made me a weapon, she said. No, Cain whispered. I made you my reason to stop being one. The scene fractured. Lila aged before his eyes, flickering from childhood to now, standing across from him in a field of mirrors, each one showing a different version of her. In some, she was monstrous. In others, she was dead. Only one mirror showed her smiling. You have to choose, she said. Cain approached the mirrors, heart pounding. Each reflection begged in a different voice. Some screamed. One laughed. He reached for the one where she smiled, but it shattered as he touched it. You don't get to choose, said her voice in the void. You already did. Cain fell backward into blackness and opened his eyes in the lab. The diagnostics were beeping in warning tones. Lila was convulsing again. Archoi shouted something, but Cain didn't hear. He moved on instinct, grabbing Lila's wrist and pressing his hand to her chest. Lila, he said. Listen to me. You are not a weapon. You are not what they made you. She opened her eyes, glowing with residual energy. Her voice layered, overlapping like a chorus from another dimension. Then what am I? She asked. You're my daughter, he said. That's enough. The lights exploded. The machines died. Silence dropped like a hammer. Then, slowly, Lila's glow faded. Her breathing calmed. The energy dissipated. She reached up, touched his face, and whispered, I remember now. Cain smiled, tears unspoken. Good, he said. Because you're going to need to forget again. Behind them, the wall cracked. A scream tore through the structure, low and ancient. Irash was coming. Not as a warlord. Not as a voice. But as something older. Something fused with the fortress. With the weapon. With Lila. We have to leave, Archoi said. Cain looked at his daughter. She nodded once, standing on her own now. Not yet, she said. Let him come. The walls didn't shake. They trembled like they were afraid. Something was moving through the bones of the fortress, not walking but consuming space as it passed. Irash was no longer a figure with a face. He had left his physical shell behind and merged with the core architecture of the cradle. He was a presence now, a storm with intelligence, wrapping itself around every circuit, every thought, every breath. As Cain stood with Lila in the silent aftermath of her awakening, the lights above them dimmed one by one. Not flickering. Not failing. Yielding. Archoi backed away toward the far console, frantically typing sequences into a broken interface. Her hands moved fast, but even she couldn't hide the panic in her voice when she said it out loud. He's becoming the cradle. We didn't build this place to contain him. It was to feed him. The network was his cocoon. Now he's coming out. Cain glanced at Lila, who stood tall, her body still crackling faintly with residual energy. Her eyes had lost the glow, but not the power behind them. She had control now, but it was like holding a live wire with bare hands. One slip, one thought too loud, and she could erase everything in the room without even meaning to. She knew it. Cain knew it. So did Irash. That's why he was coming. They moved quickly. Archoi led them down a narrow maintenance corridor beneath the main lab, a tunnel she had once used to escape a test gone wrong. The deeper they went, the more the walls turned organic, pulsing with a sick rhythm. Flesh and machine fused into something unreadable. The air smelled of ozone and rotting memory. Cain scanned ahead while Lila watched their backs, her instincts unnaturally sharp now, as if the weapon inside her had opened more than just power. It had peeled back the quiet protections between her thoughts and the rest of the universe. She didn't just hear footsteps behind them. She felt the intent of them. He's not chasing, she said. He's waiting. He wants us in the core. Of course he does, Cain muttered. That's where he gets to show off. The path ended at a vast, spherical chamber. In the center hovered the fortress's central control unit, a core of spinning crystal and metal wrapped in gravitational suspension. Above it, tendrils of black data surged upward into a throne made of raw energy. Irash had no face anymore. Just eyes scattered across the ceiling like stars in a sky that had gone insane. His voice came from every direction, low and deep and soft enough to cut skin. You brought her here, he said. Just like I knew you would. Cain stepped forward, shielding Lila with one arm. You wanted her, he said. You used me to build her, then waited for me to forget. You never forget, Irash said. You just bury. I only unearth the truth. You don't get to define the truth, Cain replied. Neither do you, the voice said. But she does. Lila stepped past her father before he could stop her. She stood in the center of the room, beneath the crystal core, eyes locked on the swirling energy of Irash's new form. The air around her wavered, bending like gravity was bending toward her now, not the core. She wasn't floating, but her feet barely touched the ground. Why me, she asked. Because you are the final word, Irash answered. The culmination of silence weaponized. You can erase me. Or become me. You can end the noise or become its origin. You're scared, she said. He laughed. The room shook. The walls hissed. Of course I am, he said. That's what makes this moment perfect. Cain activated the final module in his suit, a neural disruptor that only had one use left in it. It could fry the mind of anyone in a 10-foot radius, including himself. But it would give her a window. A chance. He moved closer, unnoticed, as Lila drew Irash's attention. Archoi's voice came through the comms. I've isolated the subroutine in the core. If she can collapse it from within, we can lock him down. But it has to be her. No one else can breach it. Cain knew what that meant. This wasn't going to end with a fight. It was going to end with a decision. Lila had to decide what kind of power she wanted to be. A weapon. Or something else entirely. She closed her eyes and stepped forward. Irash surged down toward her, tendrils of data lashing out, wrapping around her body like hungry vines. She didn't resist. She let him in. Cain screamed, rushing forward, disruptor primed, but Archois shouted for him to stop. She's sinking, Archois said. If you break it now, you'll kill her too. Lila stood in the eye of a digital hurricane, her mind wrapped in every version of herself that Irash could manufacture. One was a destroyer. Another a queen. One stood atop a mountain of corpses. Another sat alone in a garden made of starlight. Each of them spoke to her. Each offered her something. Power. Safety. Isolation. Legacy. Then she heard a voice. A simple one. Her father's. Not yelling. Not commanding. Just there, steady, like the hum of Betsy's engines back home. Like the sound of a memory she didn't know she needed. You get to choose who you are, Cain had once said. Not them. Not me. Just you. Lila breathed in. Then whispered a word that had no sound. Only consequence. The core cracked. Light exploded upward, white and clean and blinding. Irash screamed, not in pain, but in betrayal. He tried to pull himself back together, but it was too late. She wasn't his. She never had been. Cain shielded his eyes as the throne shattered. The energy inside the core collapsed inward like a dying star. Lila hovered in the center, arms stretched, holding the compression point stable as the fortress began to tear itself apart around them. You have to let go, Cain shouted. It's over. Not yet, she replied. If I stop, he escapes. Then I'm staying, Cain said. Lila shook her head, smiling through the pain. You already did, she said. Then the light consumed her. And she was gone. Cain fell to his knees as silence claimed the chamber. Not the silence of death. The silence of something finally over. Archois stumbled forward, hands shaking, checking the readings. The core was sealed. Irash was gone. The system was clean. But Lila was nowhere. Cain stood slowly, numb and cold and burning all at once. Then a whisper. Dad. He turned. She stood in the doorway, covered in ash, barefoot, smiling. I'm starving, she said. He laughed, and for the first time in years, it didn't sound like pain. The snow fell sideways, whipped by the remnants of a storm that no longer had a center. The sky above the cradle was no longer a twisting void of energy but a bruised and quiet canvas, stitched back together by the absence of Irash. The fortress was still collapsing, but not violently. It was more like a body shutting down, slowly, gracefully, as if it understood that its purpose was finished. Cain and Lila stood in the outer corridor, staring at the wreckage of a war they had both been born into, even if either had asked for it. Smoke curled from the shattered core spire behind them, and alarms had long since fallen silent, no longer sure who to warn. They didn't speak for a long time. Lila's legs shook but held. Her eyes were tired, not glowing, not echoing with power anymore. Just tired. She leaned against her father's side, and he wrapped one arm around her without needing to say anything. It wasn't victory they were feeling. It wasn't even relief. It was just the simple, overwhelming weight of still being alive when neither of them expected to be. Sometimes that was enough. Kha'Zix's voice came through Cain's calm, distorted but enthusiastic. The hacker's signal bounced through the upper atmosphere like a drunk moth, barely holding together. He said he was approaching fast in the emergency evac skiff and had strapped every thruster he owned to the back of it because subtlety was for cowards. Cain smiled and tapped twice to acknowledge. Lila raised an eyebrow. He really brought a flying dumpster, didn't he? Cain nodded. With style, too. The sound of thrusters echoed in the distance, followed by a series of explosions that were probably intentional but sounded suspiciously like engine failure. The evac skiff came screeching through the cloud line a few minutes later, wobbling, half on fire, and completely without landing gear. It skidded across the snow and slammed sideways into a ridge, stopping with a whimper. The rear hatch popped open and Kha'Zix tumbled out, covered in soot, laughing. "I told you I'd be back," he said, brushing ash off his coat like it was confetti. "And you said I wouldn't survive 5 more days without supervision." Cain helped Lila into the skiff while Kha'Zix rebooted the controls by smacking them with a wrench. Inside, the systems were half-fried, but the short-range jump drive was intact. Cain ran a diagnostic while Lila slumped into a seat, finally letting herself breathe. Her hands trembled as she looked down at her palms, half expecting the power to return, the voices to whisper again. But there was nothing. Just skin. Just blood. Just her. "I don't feel it anymore," she said. Cain turned toward her. "That's good," he said. "Is it?" she asked. "I don't know if it's gone or just waiting. If it comes back," he said, "we deal with it then." She nodded, and that was enough for now. The skiff lifted off, shuddering with every meter it climbed. Below them, the cradle cracked and splintered. Whole sections fell into the icy chasm beneath, vanishing in bursts of snow and dust. When they broke through the upper atmosphere, the sky was clean, washed of all storms. The moon's surface spread beneath them, scarred but quiet. Cain set a course for the rendezvous point, a safe station orbiting Ganymede where survivors and freelancers alike were gathering to regroup. Kha'Zix leaned back in the co-pilot seat, watching the skies shift through the viewport. "You two realize you've just dismantled an intergalactic myth, right?" he said. "Arash wasn't just a monster. He was a religion to some people. The last living god of war. And you deleted him like clearing your inbox." Cain stared at the stars ahead. "He was never a god," he said. "Just another mistake someone made and forgot to clean up." The silence in the cabin was peaceful. Lila slept for a while, curled under a spare blanket Kha'Zix claimed was made from recycled war banners. Cain stayed awake, watching the NAV systems, watching the stars, thinking. He thought about how close he had come to killing his own daughter. About how many parts of himself he'd buried to become something more than a weapon. He thought about whether any of it mattered, or whether they were just lucky. When they reached the station, a medic team greeted them on the landing pad, but Cain waved them away. Lila walked under her own power, refusing a stretcher, smiling at the crew like she was just another traveler coming back from vacation. Cain followed her with a quiet pride he didn't try to hide. Archo was already there, waiting near the docking corridor. She looked tired but alive, her white lab coat now charred and stitched. She met Cain's eyes and gave a small nod. "She's stable," Archo said. "The core strain is over. But the sequence you embedded in her, it's still dormant. We can destroy it if you want." "No," Cain replied. "Not yet." Archo didn't argue. She turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of refugees and soldiers. Her part in this story was done. Inside the station, Cain and Lila found a small observation deck overlooking the curve of Ganymede's ice fields. They sat in silence, eating something vaguely edible from ration packs and staring out into the void. Cain watched the stars. Lila watched her reflection. "I heard you," she said suddenly. "When it was happening. When I was inside that place." Cain looked at her. "What did I say?" he asked. "You told me I could choose," she said. "And I did. I chose to come back." He reached out and rested a hand on her shoulder. "You always had that choice," he said. The station broadcasted news of the cradle's collapse across the system. The syndicate was gone. Arash was gone. The weapon was gone. Or so they said. People whispered stories of what had happened in the storm. Some said a god had died. Others said a warlord had been reborn and vanished into the dark. But the only truth that mattered was that a father had walked through fire for his daughter, and she had walked back out beside him. Weeks later, a new garden bloomed on a small habitable moon just beyond the system. Cain and Lila settled there, quiet and anonymous. Kha'Zix visited occasionally, bringing contraband coffee and complaints about the lack of proper tech. Betsy was repaired mostly, still grumbling but flying. The sky was clear. The storms didn't come anymore. One morning, Lila found a message embedded in the remains of Cain's old reclaimer suit. It was hidden deep in the neural network, a backup sequence labeled only with her name. It was a message from Cain to himself, recorded years ago before the memory wipe. He spoke softly, barely above a whisper. If she ever finds out, if she ever has to carry this, tell her she wasn't made to end things. She was made to survive them. Tell her that I loved her before I knew who she'd become. Tell her I built her not because I wanted a weapon. I wanted a future. Lila watched the message in silence, then smiled. Outside, Cain was planting something new in the soil, humming an old war song out of tune. He looked up as she stepped outside, saw the look on her face, and raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" he asked. "Just a reminder," she said. "Of who I am." He nodded and returned to the soil. The garden grew around them, and for once, the stars kept their distance.